Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute delight to finally get to talk to you and to ask you some, what I'm hoping are really, well, I hope the questions are half decent, but certainly I'm looking forward to hearing your insights around so many different aspects. And I know that we've talked quite a lot around different topics. And I think there are certain things that are really vital that we bring to the awareness of so many amazing young women out there in business. And I'd like to start right there because you are a serious advocate for creating diversity across various different organizations and boards and C-suite. Perhaps give us a little bit of background as to your involvement there.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for having me, Louise. I'm really delighted to have yet another conversation with you because they're always very inspiring in both ways, it seems. So on diversity at the top, as I generally say, for me, it's really, really key that we get the right leaders, because I feel that when you have the right leaders making decisions, you actually feed the hungry children, tomorrow as well as today. You change the lives of people. But if you make the wrong decisions because you have a limited set of eyes to see with, it actually doesn't bring the world forward. And I think for me, that's just a key driver around the whole equality piece, which is something I've done all my life.
And Charlotte, I would imagine that certainly over recent years, I mean, here we are, we're sitting not quite post-pandemic, but certainly smack bang in the middle of it. But last year we saw extraordinary things happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. But before that, of course, we saw the Me Too movement, which really raised visibility around equality, diversity, equity, inclusion, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what's happened in between now and then, and whether this last year, 2020, has had a massive impact on the thinking of organizations and the drivers behind it, rather than it being a nice thing to do or a thing that we should be doing. How is that action being driven in a way that we can actually measure?
Yeah, I think we have seen a lot of progress over the years. I mean, I've been working for almost 40 years now, and I can certainly say that things have changed, right? But they haven't changed enough yet. I think technology is making it very, very transparent what is going on everywhere. And I think technology has been a key driver for both the Me Too and for Black Lives Matters, because it actually brought reality into the hands of all of us holding a telephone today. If we think about it with mobiles, before we had computers in our hand, you needed to have a desktop computer to get access. And billions of people in the world didn't have that. But as soon as we have this handset that could do the same thing as a desktop, actually, you spread out information to so many more people that can then start a movement. Because to make any change, you need a sense of urgency, and then you need a powerful coalition behind it. Without those first two steps, no change will happen, right? The sense of urgency came when it started becoming apparent to all of us with Me Too, just how many women got sexually abused and abused in other ways all over the world, and especially like in the Western world, where the women were kind of saying, do you know what, this is enough, because this is right in my face and I'm going to deal with it. And then with the very unfortunate incident with George Floyd, where again, we had it filmed in our hand. We were looking at that rather disgusting incident. And how can you not rise against something like that? And what's very interesting was that you have people all over the world rising on the back of that, because it had been just below the surface, and it was time to rise and say, this is just not okay. The conversation in the boardrooms changed with that, because it became so clear that actually you have taken it far enough, and you have now reached the level of social unrest worldwide because of this. And there's certain things in society that happens where you get this global embracing, and because of technology, we get that much faster. It comes through quickly, and it can be around the world within hours, right? And that is what we see happening. So now the leaders who are not so used to technology, because average age, for example, in the FTSEs of directors is like 64, right? So they are now having to accept the fact that we are going into a fully transparent world where actually you can't hide, you can't just do these dirty things behind the scenes and nobody knows. Everybody knows, and there is no way of eradicating that online information once it's there. It will stay somewhere, right? And that is really driving the changes that I'm seeing and the changes in the behaviors in the boardrooms, where people definitely are now saying we must have more ethnic diversity in the boardroom. We must reach that gender gap, or close that gender gap and reach what our end goal is, which is parity, right? I mean, we're 50% women, 50% men. We need to be equally represented at all layers of society. It is actually what nature meant us to do. A man and a woman together complement each other beautiful. That's what we're supposed to do. And it becomes more than just 1+1 when that relationship works well. And that's really what is driving it. The clarity is there that for many businesses, having panels or anything with all males or all females is not actually acceptable. We've got to look for the blend and for the balance. The awareness is there that we have to report on where we actually are, measure, right? As many people say, what gets measured gets done. So when you ask for the pay gap, both for gender pay gap and ethnicity pay gap, it becomes uncomfortable if they don't look good. And then the boards have got to react to it. But first, the boards has to insist that they are getting published, right? And that's the first step that some boards still are uncomfortable with. And I've had discussions where the board is saying, well, we've kind of done a gender, but we're not so keen on the ethnicity. And I was like, if you are not keen because it doesn't look good, then you have to look to yourself and accept that you have allowed that to happen. And now you have to make another decision, which is you will not allow it to happen anymore. And then drive that forward. And we are sort of in that space, but there's more people that are now saying, we will not allow this anymore, and we will hold our executives accountable through their KPIs to how those pay gaps are, to whether they have people at all levels of different kinds, and not really accept seeing this homogeneous group of whatever it might be. So yes, I would say we are moving there, and it is improving faster than I have ever seen in my 40-year executive career, right?
Amazing how everything just seems to speed up or will do, certainly.
Yes, and that's technology, right?
Exactly.
It's speeding all of, and that's exciting, and can maybe help us move up to a sort of higher cognitive level of operating as human beings. I'm hoping for that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Charlotte, how the optics often lead. How does this look? And I certainly know that when it comes to careers and looking at organizations, or when it comes to purchasing online, and we've been doing this for so long anyway, but it's been an almost sort of, okay, well, we'll check it out, but it hasn't necessarily been defining the types of decisions that we make. Whereas today, I think post-2020, what I've heard just amongst clients and friends and what have you is just even considering doing some work with an organization or perhaps engaging with them in some way, shape or form.
Yeah.
Of course, one of the first things that people now do just out of curiosity is to look at the, photos of the board and see whether that is representative of how they see the world themselves, of the values that they actually, and that's really what we're looking to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
To have
hold everybody accountable, right? All the way to the top.
And have the values that we hold dear actually represented in the companies that we decide to spend our time or money with, one way or the other. So, Charlotte, what is the gap between this shift in awareness and the discomfort? We need a certain level of discomfort in order for change to actually occur. And action. That's kind of the thing that I'm interested in learning more about, and hopefully for those people who are watching, some advice on what each one of us can do about shifting those optics into solid action. Yeah.
I think to shift the optics, we actually have to shift ourselves, right? That's not as with many things. It starts with us as individuals. I've spent the last year, especially, very much looking at sort of leadership maturity levels, what level are the different leaders operating at? And I look at 7 different levels. It's built initially like from Maslow rules, right? And then up to what's termed spiral dynamics. And then because I'm all governance, I look at the different levels of building a company within the governance up to the highest level, which we have at level 7, and that conveniently fits in with the 7 level of leadership maturity. And if you really want to reach the highest best practice level of corporate governance, for example, that is the level where actually you don't have to be told what to do, because you know what you need to do to look after the entire country, the planet, the people around you in the best way, and balance that up against the profit that the company has and the impact the company has in different ways. And that level, I don't think there are that many who operate at that level. As in with level 7 of maturity for leaders, there are not that many. We're maybe talking about 100 people in the world or something like that. But when you go through the first sort of level 2, 1 to 3, we have 85% of the population is estimated to operate, which is more sort of still focusing around building their own ego and having their own sort of agendas satisfied, if you want, self needs through whatever you get those needs covered. It could be by having a board position or blah, blah, blah. But actually, what we need to do is lift ourselves up in level 4, 5, and 6, where it's not about your own needs anymore, because you are fully able to self-satisfy them through various ways. You don't need to do that through positions or anything else. And you have inherently an understanding that diversity is needed. You need different sets of eyes to see all the unknowns, or as many of them as you can. Certainly, if you have one set of eyes, you will never see everything. But when you have many different kinds, you will actually be able to see risks and opportunities that you were not able to see before. And you have to be able to do that to operate at a higher level with corporate governance and how you govern your organizations. It goes hand in hand. When we have directors still asking why we should have diversity, you understand that they are operating at level 1, 2, 3, and they're simply not actually cognitively able to fully embrace the reason, and not only the reason, but just focus on to just know that that is how it should be, and then go into the how do we make it work, right? And so moving from the why to the hows, you can really only do when you have had that cognitive development of understanding the more holistic picture that we are one cell, all of us in one cell. And when you do something bad to other people or organizations, you do something bad to part of yourself. And you're undermining yourself and your own livelihood. Right now, climate change, we're effectively killing ourselves as a species, which is quite extraordinary considering that we regard ourselves as being intelligent and well-developed. Well, if the Western world can't lead on this, if the Western world can't lead on diversity, how do we expect the developing world to understand that they need to stop cutting females' genitals off, for example, right? And I know this is a bit harsh to say, but if we can't lead the way, who can then? And that's the sorrow that I feel when I look at the world today. I want to leave this world in a better place, than when I arrived. And it's becoming difficult. When I look at climate change, I'm thinking, that's going to be really hard for me. Let's say I live another 40 years, which I intend to do. How am I going to improve the world in 40 years so that it's better than when I was born in the 60s, right? With difficulty is the answer. So I think we have to look long and hard at ourselves, look at what it takes to have inner growth and development and wisdom, and then bring that into the leadership positions we have.
Charlotte, all of this, as you know, is music to my ears, very much so. I guess one of the things that strikes me about everything that's going on in the world today is this massive shift between, let's say, can we call them enlightened boards or boards, that typically or C-suite or leadership teams, just being a little bit more inclusive around that actually operate from an elevated consciousness or an elevated awareness or state of development, leadership development, as you were saying. And those that don't. And for me, that ultimately defines the culture in an organization. And I think that, there's a lot of talk around perhaps employees or contractors or, the people earning the the salary or the contract work that they do, perhaps being able to pick and choose in terms of the knowledge economy and where they're based and the shift around our working conditions day to day. And of course, as an ex-headhunter, I often look at, how do we actually attract the best talent on the planet for our purposes? And of course, culture is so powerful. So there are so many great reasons for leadership teams to make that shift. But of course, we both know it's really tough to shift and shape people's belief systems if they're rooted in something. So I would imagine that the only way to perhaps start tipping the balance within a leadership team, within a board, within a collection of people who are driving something forward, is to start altering how they go about building their own team in terms of their own diversity. And until that starts to happen, and of course it does create some friction and it does create some difficulty. And I guess the question is how willing, open and able are people to actually invite that in on purpose. And I would imagine too that the common driver for that, or the most compelling driver for that, will always be the bottom line.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we are still operating within capitalism, right? So I was a stock exchange trader back in the 80s, and it was all about the money, right? Wolf of Wall Street and all this. It wasn't very far away from what we saw in that movie. But I feel that we are moving more over to what I would term valueism, where it's not just about profit, it is also about the people and the planet, right? And in fact, profit is getting more and more sort of replaced by prosperity. Because profit is part of prosperity, right, for an organization. And as income is for people, people need money to pay for things. That's a construct we have made in societies. We've created something called money, and people need it, right? And if they didn't need money, it was exchange of services, which or goods, which people also need to survive. So all of these kind of constructs that we have made is holding us a bit in place. And it's very interesting how people of my generation and up seem to still be very focused around profit and reluctant to let go of what they understand as capitalism. But when you speak to younger people under 35, it's a completely different language that comes across the table, which you would know because you do that too. And I interview for board members sub 35 because they bring something different. A very natural vocabulary for them is purpose, values, impact, and they mean a positive impact. Obviously, they don't mean let's pollute the world a bit more and let's have some slave workers. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about positive impact for everybody's prosperity. And I think this is a really encouraging development. And I think the young generations are just so much more developed than we were at the same age. I have 3 teenage children. I hear it all from them. And their language and their thinking is so advanced to my thinking when I was a teenager. It could, of course, have been me being behind the curve, but I think we were all like that, right? And we were certainly all, when we were on the dealing floor in the 80s, just focused on the money. Nobody talked about the environment or anything else. We've had 40 glorious decades of being happily ignorant on what we were doing to the world, and that has now hit us, and we're leaving that to our children. So I think the shift will happen through the younger generations. I am not so sure that my generation and older are able or interested enough to do that, but they will be forced by the younger generations, who will be more than 50% of the world within the next 5 years. So what I want to also focus on is to try to lift some of these younger people into the decision-making process and be part of it and have a voice, right? Because their voice is the future, and we don't get it. And we have to acknowledge that we don't understand what the future needs. We just understand what we have done the last 50 years. And we can't wait for all of us to try to understand because, again, cognitively, we simply haven't got the ability to do that or the interest, right, to actually do that. But the young people do it automatically. And their shift is going to be a historical shift that actually could potentially lift all of humanity up to a higher level of operating cognitively. And I think that's very interesting. And I would like to do as much as I can to support that development and bring those young people into the table to show everything they can do and everything they can bring.
So the interesting thing there, Charlotte, is that, I mean, I can remember even 10 years ago, perhaps even longer, being asked by many leadership teams to help to explain millennials, lazy.
That was a bit of a wave on that one.
Please provide the bridge. Please, give us some insight into how to get these people to work. And lots of funny memes and a lot of hilarity around things like that. Those young people have grown up a little and are in exactly the position that you're describing today. And I really sense their frustration. It's almost, certainly around the 35 mark, as you suggested. I mean, they are, as you say, within 5 years, they are the next board members.
The frustration is the change that they will push, right? Because as you said before, when you have discontent, at some stage, it becomes big enough that people go, right, we now need change. And then you will have some of the social action, right? Which is what we saw with Black Lives Matters. Something else will happen in other areas where you will have a rising of the many, which is the powerful coalition that makes change happen. It can all either be the powerful leaders we have today that makes that change happen, but somehow they're choosing not to, right? So they are waiting for that powerful coalition. It's kind of just sitting. It's like sitting on the beach waiting for the tsunami and not do anything about it. But that's what's happening right now. Not for everybody, but for the majority. And that's why we're not shifting. So we're waiting for that rising of the powerful coalition of the many. And it will come. It's not going to be a black swan event, right? It is entirely predictable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have to say I find the idea pretty exciting. I sometimes wish I could go back and rewind 15 years. How lovely to be here. Charlotte, there's something else I really wanted to talk to you about, and that was neurodiversity. Was it last year or the year before? I've lost track. I seem to have lost a year. I don't know.
In the summer last year. Yeah.
Last year, you started talking about the fact that you are on the autism spectrum and shining a bright light on neurodiversity in business specifically, but I know that, of course, we're talking about all areas of life. Tell us about what your activities around that, because I find the entire topic really exciting and liberating, moving something from what has been understood as perhaps debilitating into something that is understood and seen as quite a strength in some areas of business, of course.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was quite scary to come out, as they call it, as being autistic. And once you've gone through an almost 40-year career and worked hard and achieved a certain level, you don't want to then be torn down because of people's biases against something they don't actually understand. But it became so pertinent for me to actually use the voice I have managed to build to push for change in that area too. I think neurodiverse people must be around 30% of the overall population. When you take all of them together, it could even be more. But because we are not sort of super good at coming together in big groups and communities and this, we are very overlooked. And often many neurodiverse people get dropped out in school already. The schools just give up. It doesn't fit into the standard school system. And the same for me. I mean, pretty much my school was sort of telling me that I was not very intelligent and I needed help. And it took me, the better part of 20 years to realize that possibly the opposite was the case. But by then, obviously, the damage has been done, and I still carry some of that sort of insecurity from being looked at as someone who's not very smart, and then have a greater need to prove myself, which possibly has also been part of driving me in my career. But mostly, for me, being the traits that I have from being autistic has definitely, for me, created my career in terms of the ability to focus highly on some subjects that has my interest. Governance happened to be one of them. As a trader, it was, economics and the broader politics in the world and this. But I didn't spend much time reading ladies' magazines or fictional books or this. I needed facts. I love facts, right? Real stuff. I didn't watch television. I've never really watched any television. It doesn't really have my interest unless I can choose very clearly what I want to watch. And when I was younger, that was not the case. It was what was there. You couldn't pick and choose. So I chose just not to spend any time on that. So I think neurodiverse people, ideally, I would like to create a community where we have a voice, because actually I think we have a really important part of human evolution. And Professor Baron Cohen from the Cambridge University has just come out with a book November last year called The Pattern Seekers, and sort of stating that most of pattern seekers are autistic people, but where you look very deeply into certain patterns, which you need to do to be able to create music, to be able to create mathematics, languages. If we didn't have, as part of humanity, those pattern seekers that spend all their time doing that, we possibly would not have evolved up to that next level, because when you're an all-rounder, you just don't have the depth in that specific area to put the patterns of a language together, to put the patterns of music together, to put the patterns of math together, or even think about it, because it takes deep thinking. And that has been overlooked for many, many years, and we have been sort of shut out of society for all the wrong reasons. Mozart was probably neurodiverse, and he was allowed to be left to focus on his music. And today, hundreds of years later, we are still listening to it. There's a reason for that, right? There was an ability to just bring all of those notes together in a way that is so beautiful and in tune with the waves of nature, that we still love it, right? So that's why it's so important for me that we actually start thinking about neurodiversity as a necessary part of humanity, and not as let's look at the genes and see if we can abort people before they're even born, which some organizations do, right? So I would effectively have been aborted and never had an impact on society, because I would have been deemed to be so disabled I couldn't possibly function, right? So those kind of things has got to change, right? So we have autistic people and other neurodiverse people that have disabilities in addition to being neurodiverse. But what they're doing today is that they're calling those extra disabilities neurodiversity. And that is wrong. We have got to separate the two. But it does mean, so when I get older, there is a chance that I will become much more visibly autistic in my ways of behaving, because I'm highly sensitive to certain things in this. And people said, why would you get diagnosed? I said, well, actually, because one day I might be in a situation where I don't have control over my own life. And then I want to make sure that there is a level of protection for those sensitivities to be taken into account. We think there's no old autistic people, which is wrong. I mean, we're born that way and we're going to die that way, right? So they are there, but they are in dire, if they have a disability in addition, or have dementia or whatever, they are there heavily sedated on straitjackets, right? And that shouldn't be the case. We need to look very deeply at these kind of things and ensure that we are all can have prosperity in our life, right?
And Charlotte, you have such a powerful voice in business and at the very top end. So we're talking everything from World Economic Forum and raising visibility around diversity, to now shining a bright light on neurodiversity itself. If you had to give a bit of insight and advice to people in business in terms of being able to identify and recognize neurodiverse people and make sure that as I said before, as an ex-headhunter, I'm always very conscious of putting people in the right values match, the right environment, because we only flourish when we are in the right environment. And not to say that we can't achieve all sorts of things in difficult environments, but it sure helps.
Yeah.
So for organizations to develop an awareness around how best to utilize some of the gifts around neurodiversity in their organizations, where would they start?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I'm in the process of launching an Institute of Neurodiversity, that short we call ION. it's a process that will take another 12 months or whatever, but that is to bring together tools for businesses and for business leaders and governments and academia that they can use within their organizations. And I mean, organizations like IBM, for example, have some amazing tools that they use within their workforce, where people can be neurodiverse allies, and they go through a certain training and to get a badge to say there are these kind of things. And so to collaborate with these large organizations who already have set up neurodiversity networks within their organization, not as part of disabilities, because they are recognizing that it's not. It's another thing that needs its own place. And that's the best thing I can recommend. And I know that many governments are looking at this, and certainly universities would have neurodiversity groups in many places, but not in enough places. So we need to bring this community together with allies that can then broaden the whole story out and awareness out that some of us have disabilities, but not all of us have. But being neurodiverse in a society that is not very good at embracing differences can be disenabling, right? And what we really need is to look at, why do we have such a problem with differences? And go below that and into saying, why does it matter if I look into your eyes or not? Why is that so important? Who has said that that's a law that we all need to follow? If it makes me uncomfortable, why can't I just look over here, right? But still talk to you. It's like we've made these constructs of, you must be like this. Well, actually, there's a very large group of the population that are just as effective, but that are a bit different. But actually, we are more the same that we are different. So why are we focusing on that 5% differences or whatever in some social behaviors, when actually we are all human beings, right? And I would like to try to look a bit closer at that fear of differences, or yeah, I mean, there's a word for it that I just forgot right now. But that fear of differences actually leads people to bully, to exclude, and to even kill people that are different, right? In some countries, if you're born autistic, you get either excluded or killed, right? Because they might think that you are possessed by the devil or whatever, right? Because you're different. And we need to try to look deeper into our fear of differences as a human species, as all of us, right? And then embrace. And I think it all fits together into the overall diversity. When I talk about diversity, I also talk about neurodiversity. If we're so afraid of having women at the top, blimey, I mean, never mind neurodiversity, right? Do you see what I mean? Can we just move on this agenda, please? Can we just be cognitively at a higher level? We are not, tribes against each other. Well, we kind of behave like we are, but we shouldn't. We are a planet that's going down. All of us are going down together. The pandemic has shown there are no borders. We should not exclude anyone. We are all part of the solution, or part of the death of all of us, right? This is not, there's no boundaries on this.
Totally interconnected. And I think if 1 year could show us exactly what that looks like, well, this is not going to be 1 year. This is going to be many years, right?
There's going to be many others. Yeah,
absolutely.
And we need those differences to the table to find solutions for how we get ourselves out of the mess we've gotten ourselves into. And I think part of the reason we are in such a mess is actually because we have had a very small group of minds and eyesight on creating what we have today. We have not looked at the whole broader picture, and it's been so micro-focused by probably, less than 5% or even 1% of the world population have decided for all of us. We got to change that. We got to change that to embrace much, much more diversity in that decision-making process. Otherwise, we will go nowhere other than down.
It's so interesting, Charlotte. I mean, I just spent the last few months putting together an innovation, a leadership deep dive into innovation, but not what is innovation, but how do we create collaboration from a really diverse perspective, because no innovation ever comes to light. I mean, nothing ever comes to market. No great shift is ever achieved without diversity of thought and skills and action and backgrounds and what have you. And it's so powerful. And when we're able to use behavioral science to actually measure it, and show results. I think now that these things start working in tandem, we're able to actually also show, not tell. And it's something, so yeah, absolutely. I think the facts and the figures, I was very encouraged to see last year that some of the top investment houses are headed up by women, some of the top results around the world. And
it's great,
I think
but it's taken a long time, right? It's taken a long time.
Yeah, way too long. But as you say, we always need some critical point or crisis, before we shift and change. Fantastic.
Unfortunately, but let's make sure that the critical point isn't the point where we're all dead anyway, right?
Well, you know what? At least we go down. We go down with a
together.
together with a good fight. So, Charlotte, I'm just thinking there are a couple of key things in terms of advice for, and specifically, I think for women in business of any color, culture, background, creed, whatever it might be. How do you get your first step into the boardroom if that's what you want?
It's so everybody, in a way, will have their own journey on that one. Unfortunately, the whole boardroom environment is still very much dependent on networking and on who you know, unless you're very lucky to fall. So partly I was lucky in that I moved to Jersey with my business, and when I arrived there, I started being asked would I join boards, because there are so many boards here and a smaller number of people. And I was like, I haven't got time for that. I'm running a business. But then we had the financial crisis, and I was like, okay, I really do need to understand what goes on in these decision-making layers, because they were making decisions during the crisis that was quite upsetting to a lot of the institutions that I was speaking to, the large institutional investors. So I then engaged with the whole governance piece, and I was like, gosh, this is extraordinary. It's so easy to do the right thing, but so much of the wrong things are happening here. How can we straighten that out? And I think as a woman wanting to reach into the boardroom, you have to network. I really don't subscribe to the women need to be more like men kind of discussion. I just think that's outrageous. Women are women. I mean, my reply to that generally is, and should blind people see more? Right? Because actually that's what they're asking women to not be women. Why is that? It's through being women that we are diverse, and that we think differently, and that we bring something else to the table. And we know that there are those differences between men and women, and we need to accept them. Unfortunately, I think I was also relatively successful in the boardroom because I do behave a bit more leaning to the male side, right? So I was not trying to be a man in a skirt, but naturally, and that comes from the autism, a lot of autistic women are like tomboys when they were young, as was I. Again, research has sort of said that being autistic is sort of a male syndrome, so you slide a bit more over to the male side, and a lot of autistic women are like neurotypical men. But so our behaviors are within the neurotypical range, which is why we don't really get picked up. But we are more male in our ways. And most of the female peers I see today, to be honest, are more male, not because they specifically want to be, just because that's how they are. And then they got chosen because the men felt more comfortable. They were one of the guys. But actually now we need to move away from that, and we need women to be brave enough to come in and be women, right? But we still need to blaze that trail. So to get into doing that, and I'm not keen on saying that, but we just have to be realistic. Partly, we still have to be a bit like the men, because whether we like it or not, they're still the decision makers, right? They still occupy 80-90% of board positions. So that is the environment we have to fit into. But once we are in, we can then start influencing in the female way, right? Which is actually what most of these boards need. But from needing it to bringing it onto the board, there's a bit of a gap. So we have to help them and then be those trailblazers. Once we come in, bring another one or two women on. It's like 3 or more is really the tipping point where it has a sustained impact on what the organization does. So for all women everywhere, I have to say, we still have to be trailblazers. Hopefully, if we blaze on this trail for the next 20 years, our children will not have to, right? So reaching it, you have to push in and keep pushing it. Do not lose your interest in getting onto boards after you've had 4 rejections. I mean, I still get rejected on 4 out of 5 I apply to, and I've done it for 15 years, and I'm a so-called expert in government. I mean, that doesn't mean they want me, right? Because actually by now people know I'm fairly opinionated, and that will exclude me from a number of boards. Some boards call me trouble, right? Because I will come in and say things as they are.
I think I'd rather be called trouble than anything than compliant.
Well, it does exclude you from certain areas.
Perhaps, yeah.
Just say, not going there. Yeah.
It so correlates with, of course, all of the research around how, women need to feel that they really understand and have a grip on something 120% or 110 or 101 before they'll put their hands up, at least 100% for something, whereas men quite happy to put their hands up at sort of 70, in that gap somewhere. Yeah. And unfortunately, yes, often that is the advice, just be like a bloke.
Yeah, but that's
certainly
not
to begin with in terms of getting yourself in, or, having the belief in yourself that you can do it.
Yeah, and then, that's uncomfortable. Sorry.
Yeah, but I thoroughly agree with you. And I think the yin and the yang, the energy and the qualities and what have you around being a woman, being female, are exactly the reason why diverse organizations, diverse boards, C-suite perform better, because we need those. We need those differences.
I mean, something that's very obvious, but nobody wants to talk about. I mean, if we really want to have women being more like men, should we also aim for jails to be 50-50 filled with women and men, right? Because currently more than 95% of inmates in jails around the world are men. They're men. So there is some compelling statistics here to show us the differences in how we behave. And often when women do break the law, they get judged harsher because the judges feel that that is not what women do. So why do we then choose that to take the gender that breaks the law the most to lead us, right? And then not have the gender who doesn't to dilute that tendency, right? I mean, they come together with testosterone and estrogen, all these kind of lovely things. But actually, it is very clear that men break the law more than women, right? So why don't we ensure that we have that balance where the women can weigh in 50% when maybe the men are compelled to do something that they shouldn't be doing, and the women there. I mean, but this is a conversation nobody wants to have.
And no, exactly. And actually, this is reflected in insurance policies and what have you. Women perhaps being safer drivers or having less accidents.
It's so
and
clear.
Therefore getting better rates. I mean, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, it reminds me of a beautiful book written, I think it was the year before last, so 2019, called Invisible Woman. I'm not sure if you read it.
No, I haven't.
Really about how everything in our world is designed around a 70-kilogram white male. Yeah. And, everything from our seats in our cars, which mean that in the same accidents, women will be hurt way more because the seats are not designed for us, to medication, which is all tested on 70-kilogram white men.
Yeah.
It doesn't take into consideration the diversity, perhaps even between ethnicity and how we respond to various different treatments and drugs, drug protocols. So it goes on, but it's definitely a book worth reading. I think it was, I forget her name, who wrote the book. I'll post it afterwards. Charlotte, thank you so much for your time. I really would like to just end on the World Economic Forum and what's going on around that. Everybody's been paying attention for the last few years, just in terms of something to aim for, something pretty clear that has seemed pretty unobtainable, and yet it's right there for all of us. But certainly around the topic of diversity, inclusion, equity. Tell us a little bit more about your insight there.
Well, it's so I was invited in to be part of it just last year, so not very recently, and it is pretty amazing everything. I mean, the output is available for most people on the website of the World Economic Forum, but there are the networks behind it of people around the world who are trying to drive more research, more knowledge into a whole range of areas, so also diversity and generally following the UN Sustainable Development Goals and try to drive them forward. And I have to say, so I know there's some criticism around it as well, but the world of sort of leaders is just mainly white males, as you pointed out, right? And that has that kind of influence, and there is a drive to broaden that out and bring more balance in the participants in that way as well, and basically just drive awareness more. And I think if more people actually went in and had a look at the available material there is a huge amount to learn, and there's organizations from all over the world that are contributing to the material that's being gathered within their area. And I feel privileged to be able to be part of it for sure. And I've only just scratching the surface on the depths of research to be found in that area. But setting up groups of interested parties in this, on climate change, for example, they have a group looking at climate change governance, which is one that I'm part of. And how do we incorporate that into governance around the world? So going away from the individual countries' corporate governance codes, because we need something that is global, right? We need tools and insights and principles to follow that are global, and that is very much what the World Economic Forum is driving, and have been trying to do so since it started in 1971. It's been around for a long time, and I think it's trying to do some of the right things, especially making information available outside of the network, and making sure that the right people come to the table to have conversations that they can then sort of waterfall out to their own networks and make sure that those conversations happen.
Absolutely. And I guess the message there is very simple: get involved, go and have a look.
Yeah, absolutely.
and see which bit lights your fire, and if you can take action around it. Yeah, absolutely. Charlotte, it's been an absolute delight talking to you. There's so many other things I'd love to talk to you about. And perhaps we'll do this again in 6 months' time, and have a look, or perhaps closer to the end of the year, and see where we've got to over this extraordinary period of time. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure as always.